Hi guys, this is the fifth video in a series I've been doing on web development, and we've been roughly tracing the evolution of web development. And in this video, we come to a tool called Rails, and this tool really marked a big step forward for me in my web development. And we're going to cover it probably in a few videos because there's quite a lot to cover. So I think the big shift in thinking for me when I started working with Rails is before I used to think about websites really as a collection of web pages. So when I would start out the process of creating a website, I'd think, well, what web pages do we need? We need a home page, a login page, a contact us page. This is going to be an online shop, for example. So we're going to need a products page and an about page, and we would design the web pages, and uh, basically we would start from there, and we'd work out, what kind of database tables are we going to need, what kind of functions are we going to need. uh, we'd work all that out as we built out our web pages. Now, working with Rails, you start in a different place. You start out by thinking about what is the data that my web application is going to deal with, right? So this is an online shop, for example. So we're going to have products, okay? We're also going to have orders and customers, and we're going to have payments. And this is the place where you start thinking about the design of your web application, and you get this right, and you work out the relationships between these domain objects, right? So this here is your data model. Okay, and you work out the relationships between these domain objects. For example, a customer is purchasing a product, and products are added to an order, and a customer makes a payment for an order, which consists of products, and you work out those relationships. And based on this, on building out and defining this data model or this domain model, okay, you work that out first. And then all of the other bits and pieces, like what web pages do we need, what functions do we need, they kind of flow out of this domain model. Now, this was a big shift for me, and a very, very positive shift, because I think this shift to thinking about web applications in a domain-driven design approach really enables us to create more complicated web applications. The next important concept that Rails introduced me to is a design pattern called Model View Controller. And the Model View Controller, or MVC design pattern, answers the question, how do we structure our web application? So how do we arrange our web application's files and scripts? What folders do we put them in? Which files should do which jobs? How do we ensure that our web application remains easy to maintain as it grows? And we'll go into detail on the MVC design pattern as we go forward, looking at Rails, possibly in a future video. Now, the way that Rails works enables another really important feature of Rails, and that is automation, or you could say code generation. So with Rails, you start out by, when you're designing your web application, you start out by defining your data model. And then you use the MVC design pattern to tell you how to structure your application. And if you put these two things together, you find yourself now able to create tools that can actually do a lot of the work for you by generating the code for you. So let me try to illustrate this. Think, for example, about an online shop application. So in an online shop application, we're going to have a product. That product is going to need a table in the database called the product table. And that product is going to need a few web pages. It's going to need a page to list the products, a page to show the details of a product, a page to create a new product, a page to update a product, and a page to delete a product. Now, imagine in our online shop application, we have a customer domain object. Now, the customer is going to need a customer table. It's going to need a web page to list the customers, a web page to show the customer details, a web page to create a customer, a web page to update a customer, and a way to delete a customer. And you can see how there's a pattern emerging here. Okay, so for every one of our domain objects, at minimum, they're going to need a table to store the domain object data in, and they're going to need pages to enable the user to see the list of all of the domain objects, to view it, to create one, update one, and delete one. And because of this repeating pattern, the Rails product designers could then create a tool, a script, which would basically, based on your domain model, would just generate all this other stuff for you. And that code generator is called scaffolding, and it's a real time saver when it comes to getting started with your web application. It's a really great feature of Rails, and we will see that as we move forward in the future videos on Rails. Rails also solves much of the headache of working with a relational database. It does this through two design patterns: object relational mapping and active record, which we will look at in more detail in the upcoming videos. Before Rails, a web developer would have to write the code to implement these patterns him or herself. This is a very challenging task for a junior developer, and it's a time-consuming task for a senior developer. Object relational mapping is a design pattern which shows us how to map the tables, which is how data is stored in a relational database, through to the objects, which is how data is stored in memory in object-oriented programming languages. So these columns of the relational database map through to these properties of the product class. Active record is a pattern for reading and writing data to and from a relational database. And it provides functions like this one here: a function to get a product by ID, a function to list all of the products, a function to get a product by name, a function to search for products by stock levels greater than a given quantity, a function to save, and a function to delete a product. So that's just an example of some of the functions that you might write when you're implementing the active record pattern. Now, Rails provides a framework which largely automates and creates these classes for you and implements these two patterns, object relational mapping and active record, for you. So you don't have to worry about writing them yourself. In the next few videos, we're going to create an application using Rails. So first of all, we're going to create a domain model. Then we're going to use the code generator to generate the scaffolding for us. We're going to see how the files are organized according to MVC, and we're going to see how we can use the object relational mapping and active record, the data access framework of Rails, to work with the database.